Okay, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to replace the rear wheel bearings on a Volvo 240. And there's the Volvo, the wheel is off, and here is the rear wheel bearing. And it's on an axle half shaft. This axle shaft goes into your differential on the rear wheels of your car. You have one on either side. To do this job, well, you're going to need a axle bearing kit, which has a new bearing already pre-packed with grease, a couple oil seals, and a retaining ring, which is this thing right here. Basic tools, and you could do this job. Now, there is one additional thing you'll need, and this is where you have an option. If you want, with just basic tools, you could take out this axle half shaft, bring it to a garage. If you could find a garage that will do this job for you, and they could press on and off the old bearing. Press off the old bearing, press on the new bearing. I've called garages to do kind of just press work before, and usually it's between $30 and $50 for them to touch a press. So if you want to do this job, you could buy the axle kit for around the bearing kit for around 60 bucks. Bring it to a garage. 60 bucks per axle, so about 120, 100, between 100 and 120 for the bearing kits, depending on where you get them. Bring it to a garage, pay about another $60 to $100, and they will replace the bearings on the axle half shafts, and you just have to reinstall the bearings. So if that's how you want to do the job, the whole price is under 300 bucks. You could do it with basic hand tools. You do have to have the time to have the car up on jack stands while you're taking it back and forth to taking the axle shaft back and forth to the garage. If you want to do the whole job yourself, you really do need a press, like my 12-ton press over here. And we're going to go ahead and give this a shot, replacing this wheel bearing with my press. Now, classic signs of a bad wheel bearing would be a grinding noise coming from the rear of the car, or screeching, or some unusual noise. Now, these old Volvos tend to have a lot of miles on their drivetrains, and I find there's always a little bit of humming coming from differential, rear bearing, carrier bearing. Hard to tell for sure. Another test of your rear bearing is to rock the tire in a 10 and 6 position, so sort of back and forth like this, and see if it has any play. Mine has a little bit of play. I'm replacing these bearings as a maintenance item. It's winter, I don't drive the car in the winter, so I just want to get some of these things done that I don't know when the last time they were done is. This car has 270,000 miles. There's a good case to be made for if it's not broke, don't fix it. I'm not gonna be replacing these bearings anyway. Next step, take the tires off the car. Okay, so first you're gonna have to put the car in neutral. Take off the handbrake, disengage it, wedge the front tires so the car can't roll forwards or backwards, jack up the car by the rear differential, and put sturdy jack stands on the lifting points just in front of the tires. Now that the wheel is off, it's time to remove the brake components, the caliper and the brake rotor. And old Volvos have a couple unique quirks to them. One's inside the brake rotor. We'll see that in a few minutes. But when you're taking this caliper off, it's supplied by a single hard line, a metal tube that feeds the brake fluid to the brake caliper. So this is not going to be able to move a lot. There's two 13mm bolts holding it on. We're going to unbolt them. We're going to move this over and then tie it to the spring, but we're not going to be able to manipulate it very far because that hard line, we don't want to kink it or bend it. So we have to be pretty gentle with this. It's kind of a quirk of these older Volvos, so be careful with that. We'll take this off, just move it a little bit this way, and hopefully get it tied up to that spring so we can get at the brake rotor. Okay, so we have the two bolts we have to remove. They're 13mm, this one here, and this one down here, and this is the hard line we have to be careful of not to kink. So these could be a little bit tight, usually on brake calipers. We'll give this a try. Definitely a little bit tight, so we're gonna have to try to get some leverage on this. Okay, now that I got my caliper tied up out of the way, I take off the brake rotor. There is one 10mm pin that holds this on. This usually is not too tight. Let's see. There we go. So you just take this off, and then, if we're lucky, this brake rotor will wiggle off. Just like that. Okay, so this is the second part of the quirkiness of the Volvo 240 braking system. The rear brakes are disc brakes, but the parking brakes are these basically cable-operated drum brakes that work on the inside of your brake rotor. So these are basically drum brakes here. This is what happens when you pull the parking brake or the handbrake. The cable pulls on these expand, and it locks up your rear wheels for parking or emergency situations. You have to take this apart to take the half shaft out of the car. So I've never actually done this on the 240 before, so I'm going to do this one step at a time. I'll show you what I do, but the number one piece of advice I give you here, there are springs and stuff down here that you're going to have to take out. Take out your cell phone that you're going to have to remove. Take out your cell phone now. Take pictures of how this all is put together. So when you go to put it back together after you're done with the rotor, when you're done with the bearing, you could do it. So my advice is take pictures, and we'll start with this first spring right here, which should allow me to start to take these brake shoes off. After you get the parking brake out of the way, there are some bolts along the inside here. On this car, they're 14mm, and you get access to them through this clever little hole here. So you just put your socket in there, you loosen it, you rotate it, you rotate it to the next one, you loosen that one all the way around, and this is how you remove the hub from the car. So this is only 14mm on this one, so I have my ratchet and my cheater pipe. Let's see how tight this is. Oh, not bad at all.
I'm going to need a cheater pipe. All right, that's one. Now let's take the rest out.
Okay, so now we have to remove this half shaft, and it's going to be pretty stuck in there. So I'm going to show you a trick for pulling this out. Okay, so here's a trick. I've put the brake rotor on backwards and screwed them on with the lug nuts, and this lets me use the whole brake rotor as kind of a slide hammer to remove this half shaft. So I'm going to give it a couple bumps here and see if I can't get it to come out. Okay, of course you could also use a pry bar back here to pop this out. But once this breaks loose, this is your half shaft coming out. This goes all the way back to your differential. This might smell like gear oil, which smells terrible. And here, if I stand this up, is the bearing we'll be replacing. This is going to be the thing that takes the force. We can hear it cracking. And there goes the wood. So, no success on getting that ring off. We might have to cut it. Well, I broke something. Okay, I had absolutely no luck pressing off the first bearing. I ended up just having to carefully cut the retaining ring and the bearing off and crack it. It took forever. It was kind of annoying. So I borrowed a bearing separator from AutoZone. So I'm going to try I'm gonna give this a second try on the passenger side bearing. I'm gonna cut this retaining ring. Then I am going to put the bearing separator in, hopefully crack that bearing away from the seat, and then press it out without having to spend an hour very carefully cutting. But I'm gonna go ahead and give this a nice rough cut right now. I've cut most of the way through this retaining ring, and it's loose now. I can work it off with a screwdriver. So next thing I'm gonna do is use the bearing splitter to start to drive this bearing off, and then we'll just pop it out and press, hopefully. But this is loose now, so that's gonna help a lot. Let's get the bearing splitter and drive a gap between the bearing and the ledge on the half axle. Hey, it's starting to come off. Okay, hopefully we'll have a little bit easier time pressing the new bearing on than we did getting the old bearing off. But we have to put everything on in the right order. So the first thing, don't forget this little metal plate. If that was on your if that was on your axle shaft, that would go first. Next up would be the seal, this seal. This goes down over and then sits just over this lip here, like that. And next up would be the bearing. Now the bearing goes on one way. You have to make sure that you get the bearing on the right way. On this FAG bearing, the printed writing faces in towards the differential, and if you look here on this side, on the inner race, there's a bevel, and this faces out towards the wheel. You could also, you're not gonna be able to see this on camera, but you could also see that the rollers are sort of angled, and you want them angled in towards the differential, as like this. So they're angled in, the cone is sort of pointing towards the differential and out towards the wheel. So this is also a pre-packed bearing. It's already packed with grease from the manufacturer. It also came with a little bag of grease, which I think I'll put a little bit more on this side of the bearing because this looks a little bit dry, and I will also put some grease in sort of the cup of this seal. But remember, make sure you get this bearing on the right way. So with the FAG bearing, it's words going towards the differential. And last but not least, you would put this retaining ring on, like that. We're gonna put this in the press and press the whole thing down. So I'm gonna put a little bit of grease on this bearing and in the seal, and then we'll get it set up on the press. And before we could put the half axle back into the car, we have to install a new oil seal, which will hopefully keep this differential oil from coming out. So this just gets pressed in here. I'm going to tap it in. So I had to reattach this cable to this little pin fell out. So we're gonna put that pin back in, and then there's arrows on this little device here say this way up. So it goes like this. When the cable pulls it, it pushes out this little hook, which activates the parking brake. So we're gonna put this here before we put back on the half axle, and now we can install the half axle. So one particularly annoying thing about this whole job is putting back together the parking brake. So we're gonna go ahead and do that now. It's just finicky with springs and kind of annoying if you ever done a drum brake system before. So we got to put the shoes back in. There are clips that hold these. And so if you take a look at the shape of the shoe, one side has a hole in it, one side has a notch in it. The two sides with holes go close to the, there's two brake shoes, one over here, one up here. The two sides with holes should go closer to each other, and then just click them in to the clips. Then we're gonna do a spring, the spring is gonna hook onto the hole between the two holes, and then there's a spreader bar that we'll put in between after we put the spring on. Let's get the spring on first, so we're not trying to stretch that too far. All that's gonna go right down there. Okay, this top spring wasn't too bad. Just put the spring on before the spreader. Check everything after you're done. Arrange it. Make sure all the springs are hooked fully. Make sure it's on the mechanism that activates it, and then hit it with some brake cleaner because you probably had greasy hands. And now you can put the brake rotor back on and put everything back together, and you did the rear wheel bearings of a Volvo 240.